Hi and welcome to the Geek Legion of Doom. There's a historical movie review and I'll be having a look at the movie The Kingdom of Heaven, specifically the director's cut. So this is a 3-hour long movie, so I'm only going to give you a very brief synopsis of the plot, and I'll also be talking about the differences between the standard version and this version, then obviously sort of going through what I like and don't like about the film so much. So basically, to give you a very brief synopsis of the film, this film obviously directed by Ridley Scott and starring Orlando Bloom as Balian, who starts the movie as a blacksmith, where he is approached by a noble knight who it turns out to be his father, and he's played by Liam Neeson. And basically he convinces him to sort of become a knight himself and ultimately join him in the Holy Lands. And once we get to sort of Jerusalem, Balian ultimately tries to sort of take the best aspects of what he's learned throughout his life and become sort of a noble and honourable man. And there he kind of meets the king among other people, and the king is played by Edward Norton. Unfortunately, the king has got severe leprosy and constantly has to sort of wear a mask, and he's got a very uneasy sort of truce going with the leader of the Muslims, Saladin. Unfortunately, the king knows he has only a short time left on this mortal coil because he has sort of severe leprosy, and he knows ultimately that once he dies, he knows when he passes that war is ultimately inevitable, and tries to convince Balian to take certain actions that may prevent it and extend the peace. We're asked the question, does the end justify the means? Balian has a situation that arises ultimately that forces him to make a choice that may have the potential for greater good, but ultimately goes against his moral code and judgment now. And that's a very interesting question. It's possibly one of the most interesting aspects of that film, although it is only a short scene. And I have to say that's probably one of my favourite scenes of the movie. Now, that's all I really sort of go on too much about the plot here. Now, the extended version, the director's cut, is nearly 3 hours long. It has 50 minutes of extended material. Now I'm going to talk about some specific plot points here, so if you haven't seen the film, this is going to contain some spoilers. So one major plot arc here that was cut from the sort of standard version, and a couple of sort of minor bits here and there as well. So the major plot arc that was ultimately cut, the major plot point that was cut from the theatrical version was that Sibylla, who is the king's sister played by Eva Green, in the director's cut she actually has a son. So when Edward Norton's king dies, then the son is then heir to the throne. Unfortunately then she finds out that her son actually has leprosy as well, and she can't bear to really sort of see him grow up to have the sort of same sort of disease as her brother, so she sort of kills him, and then ultimately Guy, her husband, sort of assumes the throne, and he's kind of this bloodthirsty guy who just thinks because they're Christians they're going to rule regardless, and ultimately this sort of ends up being the sort of the downfall. So that whole plot point was completely cut out of the theatrical version. It gives a lot better motivation to Eva Green's character, the Queen, as to why she sort of decided to sort of support her husband in that action ultimately. What you've also got is, at the beginning of the film, there's a holy man. In this version, we actually learn he's actually Balian's brother, and there's some sort of political family motivations going on there as well. Apart from that, I mean, there are a lot of more sort of gore scenes and sort of violence that were actually cut out of the theatrical version because they wanted to get the rating down. So the version here is a lot more bloody, a lot more violent, and I actually think that it's a lot better because you can actually understand the motivations that much more. Now, I actually saw the original theatrical release at time of release at the cinema, and I've only just watched this director's cut. And I think it's a particularly good film. I don't think it's the most memorable of Ridley Scott's work, but it is a decent film. I mean, this director's cut is certainly worth looking at if you haven't seen it, or if you kind of maybe thought the original wasn't quite as memorable. Now, I have to say, maybe Orlando Bloom, I don't think he is the best leading man ever. He's not a particularly bad leading man in this, but I don't think he's exactly exciting either. I think he comes across as a little bit dull sometimes. I think it's actually his best work in regard to its acting ability, but I put a lot of that on sort of Ridley Scott, to be quite honest with you, in his direction of him. Watching this movie so long after it's been released, you'll actually recognise quite a lot of faces from the things you may have seen more recently. There's a couple of people you'll recognise from Game of Thrones, for example, and there's a whole host of sort of different character actors that you actually are probably going to recognise because they've maybe become a little bit bigger but since this film's come out. Plus there's a whole host of recognisable names in there. I've already mentioned Liam Neeson. You've got Jeremy Irons, for example, along with a whole host of others. Now, it's not a particularly action-packed film, I have to say, especially this 3-hour version, but when it does actually have action and the kind of the battle towards the end of the film, and ultimately the Muslims try and take Jerusalem, it's, you know, it reminds you very much of like the Two Towers, if you've seen that, and it's really well shot. I've got to say the visual effects look absolutely stunning. I don't think there's ever a point where you're kind of thinking, oh, that looks a little bit like wonky CGI and stuff like that. It just really envelops you, and I think it's really good because of that. Ultimately, it's a really great film, and I have to say I thoroughly enjoyed watching this version. I think maybe the beginning of the film was could have done a little bit tightening up. Once you sort of get to Jerusalem, and I think then it's sort of, you know, it's a fantastic movie. But I think prior to that, it maybe could have done a little bit tightening up, even in this sort of extended version, I have to say. But overall, I think it's a fantastic film. If you haven't seen it, I suggest go and checking out this director's cut. I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. What did you think of it? Leave me a comment. How do you feel compared to the spectacle version? Leave me a comment. Look forward to you next time. Bye for now.